Hi, everyone. I'm Henry DeVries, the publisher at Indie Books International. Welcome to this month's Q&A on marketing with a book. We have two authors that are going to share some of their journey, and then we're going to open up to Q&A. So any question you want to ask our authors, Devin DeVries, our VP of Production and Promotion, or myself about planning a book, writing a book, publishing a book, and promoting a book, the four P's. Happy to discuss those things. And our motto is that publishing a book is the starting line, not the finish line. And this is also a good thing when you ask your question, just briefly your name and the title of your book, just the title, not the subtitle. That's a tip. Um, Title of book, and then your question. So that'll be good. First up, I think I see Joel Goldberg. Devin, why don't we spotlight Joel? And Joel, tell us, give us about 5 minutes on this book and the storytelling aspects of it. And the mic is yours.
All right, Henry, thank you. Devin, thanks. Good to see everybody in our little virtual boxes here, and thanks for being here. So this is the new book as of today, Small Ball Big Dreams, and so super exciting for all of you, and you've all been through this. It's my second time. It's a weird thing, right? It just suddenly it's here in existence after all of that work, and so it's a bit surreal. I think a little bit surreal for me because I never intended to write books. This is a book about grit and resilience, would be the best way for me to say it. The background that I'll give you on the title and sort of the origin of all of this. First and foremost, I'm a TV broadcaster. I have been for 30 years, just about all in sports, and the last 17 in baseball. A light bulb went off about 8 years ago, where some people suggested, because I work 6 months a year, full time, 7 days a week for the baseball season, traveling with the Kansas City Royals as one of the broadcasters, that I should start a speaking business. Had no idea such a thing existed. And the first thing that everyone told me, if I wanted to be a quote unquote motivational speaker, was that I needed to write a book. And my next question was, what would I even write a book about that anyone would care about? And I never wanted to write or speak about baseball. I wanted to use it as a teaching tool. And I never wanted to do, here's the latest with this team. I just didn't think that was interesting. And so I knew, being in a small market with a team that had just won a World Series, that I think people, whether they like baseball sports or not, can relate to the quote unquote little guy, the Cinderella story. And so the question became, how did they do it? And the answer was by building a strong culture and good people. And so that's what I started speaking on. The best piece of advice I got was when I thought I would hire a ghostwriter, and I did not. I wrote these books myself, the first and this one. But at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. And I met with a ghostwriter, and she said, "You're not ready to write a book, start a podcast." And I tell everybody, if you're interested, start a podcast. It's a great way to promote what you're doing, to connect with people, to build a brand. And so I did that. And with it not being a baseball podcast, I thought I'd have a cutesy little baseball theme. And I asked, and still to this day, ask every one of my guests, what is the biggest home run you've hit professionally? What is the biggest swing and miss you've taken? And the last one, in baseball terms, small ball, is the bunts and the sacrifices. But in the real world, what are the little things that make you successful, that don't show up on the sales sheet or the score sheet or whatever? That was my first book, Small Ball, Big Results. Many of you may know the great Mark LeBlanc. As soon as I finished Small Ball, Big Results, which I published on my own, he said, "I have the title for your next book." And my first response was, "Can I breathe a little bit?" And after I started breathing, I started writing Small Ball, Big Dreams. And with the help of Henry and Devin and all of their team, they published it. It came out today. And so I'm very lucky. I'll wrap this up. I'm sure I'm close to my 5 minutes. That because of this podcast, which that woman at the time told me, there are four reasons for you to start a podcast. One is you know how to interview people already. Okay, I do that for a living. The second is it's a great networking tool. It was. The third is it's a great branding tool. It has been. And the fourth was it'll create you a lot of content, and it did. That content now turns into speaking material, blogging material, newsletter material. And just about everybody that is in this book was on my podcast, not all. And I think the beauty of it is that we all can relate to dreams. I never realized that my dream of being a TV broadcaster, so the dream did come true, would turn into me interviewing other people about their dreams. And I thought, with all these connections in baseball, in business, in life, I even wrote a chapter about my mom. Mark's advice was pick a strong woman to write about, because you speak to a lot of audiences where a good chunk of the people in the audience are women. So I picked like 4 great women, and my mom is one of them. And the interesting thing, and I'll wrap this up, is my mom heard the same thing as one of the other subjects in the book, a woman named Susan Waldman. My mom was told, as Susan was back in the 60s, that when you're getting out of school, women either need to be teachers or nurses. And those were the only 2 choices. Both heard the same thing. And my mom became a teacher and went back to school when we got a little bit older, to community college, and she ended up becoming a programmer, or now we call it a coder, and then eventually into upper management and leadership and this whole incredible path. The other woman, Susan Waldman, was on Broadway. She was an actress and ended up becoming one of the voices of the New York Yankees, a pioneer in broadcasting for women. There's another woman in there named Laura Sanko, who is the first ever UFC, I'm not a big fighting guy, but UFC female broadcaster. So the book's chock full of just incredible dream stories that either went awry and went to different paths, and full of inspiration. And I'm super excited to release it to the world today.
Joel, thanks. Devin, tell them if they wanted, as since they're a member of the Indie Books family, what could they do to support Joel as another member of the Indie Books family? And could they do it for under $1?
Indeed, they can. Today launches Joel's 99-cent Kindle sale, so we'll put the link in the chat. If you could buy that, and we're looking for honest reviews as well, would be really helpful for Joel.
So that makes it a verified purchase review on Amazon. I think 99 cents is the lowest we can go to have it be a verified purchase. And it's very helpful, because we're judged. Yes, we're judged by readers who look at us on Google and then get to us on Amazon, and they look down and they see the book and they see how many people have reviewed it. It's more important than, how high the rating is. 3 people and with giving you 5 reviews is less credible than 25 people and you scoring a 4.1. That's more believable that not everybody's going to love your book. In life, not everybody loves you, so that's no surprise. But when it's oh yeah, 5 people gave me 5, that means, well, there's 5 friends. That's nice. So again, if you could do that. So we're going to go from the world of baseball, not really baseball. Baseball is a metaphor for people's dreams, to martial arts, and not really martial arts, but martial arts as a metaphor for success in business and life. So we've got John St. James here, a fellow UC San Diego Triton. Go Tritons. Good to see you, John. And why don't you spend 5 minutes talking about your book? And we can't hear you yet. Some kind of muting is going on.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
We can hear, yes, in that famous words of Verizon, we can hear you now.
Go Tritons. Yeah, so I am John St. James, and I was listening to Joe at a great presentation. And he's talking about something that he loves. The Japanese term for this is ikigai. To do what you love, to do something that you're good at, to do something that people need, to do something that people will pay for, something that's your mission, your sacred purpose. And obviously, Joel's very good at that, I can see. So, and a great speaker. So I want to start out by saying I'm going to buy your book at full price. I'm going to go into Amazon and do that today. So anyways, yes, I'm John St. James. I oversee an international sanctioning body, which is a fancy way of saying an international martial arts organization. I am a ninth degree black belt. I've been doing this for 50 years, so I'm an old guy. I always like to say that because people go, oh, he's got to be lethal. No, not really. I do most of my work over the telephone these days. But we have schools in the United States and Mexico and Canada, in Nepal, in the UK, and I oversee these schools and I really help them grow. What I do basically is I help them with the big three. I help them gain new students, I help them to retain those students longer, and then I help them to maximize spend to increase revenue. That's kind of what I do for a full-time living. And then in my part-time, I oversee a 501c3, a public charity. And what we do with that is we provide free martial arts and leadership training through two different groups that I run, which is the World Leadership Foundation and the APTSD Foundation, which provides free martial arts training on one side and free leadership training on the other. So that's kind of what I do. And then I try to write from time to time. So I wrote a book called The Master's Path. And in that book, I kind of go through my background. So, probably most people go, well, how does that, what does that have to do with me in business? So the first thing that I do is I help our school owners to develop a leadership academy. That's really what I do. That's my specialty. So 30, 40 years ago, I created a leadership system and we plant these into schools and we actually develop men, women, and children in leadership training. And so we do this with we use the value ladder, basically. I'm sure you all know what that is. And so they come in as a basic student, and then they move into the leadership program. And then after the leadership program, we hope that many of them will go into instructor training. And that's really where we focus most of our time and efforts are on that 1 to 10% that really have a passion and want to continue to give back to the community. So that's kind of what I do is I focus on leadership training. My story very, very briefly, because I know I don't have much time, was in 1979, I was at the University of the Pacific. I decided that I didn't like Stockton, California, so I flew to San Diego. And luckily for me, my first teacher to first degree black belt had a school in Chula Vista. So I actually lived in the studio. I taught there full time. Even when I was at UC San Diego, our alma mater there, Henry, I was living over the men's locker room and I was teaching martial arts classes. I was also learning how to write contracts because I was selling contracts at the age of 18. So what I've learned over the years and working with a lot of people is everybody wants to be seen, heard, valued, and understood. So what we kind of do is we work on trying to work with people so that they are seen, heard, valued, and understood. And that's kind of what this book is about. It's about finding happiness, joy, and fulfillment in what you do and really living what you do. It's your path, it's your master's path. It's a life journey. So that's just a little bit about me. My book is on Amazon. I do some consulting and coaching, but really I spend most of my time overseeing my organization.
John, thank you. John didn't mention this, I think, out of humility, but in his martial arts discipline, a fellow ninth degree black belt is Chuck Norris. And so they understand, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but this level is where you're a teacher, it's like a professor. It's like somebody who shares the wisdom and the knowledge, and that's certainly your work. And I think that's the work of a lot of people on this call. Did I track that right, John?
Yeah, actually, Chuck Norris and I have the same instructor. We trained in the same school, and I always say the only difference between Chuck Norris and I is he's 20 years older and is a lot more wealthier than I am. But Chuck Norris is definitely somebody that I know. I've been to tournaments with Chuck Norris back in the day. We actually used to compete up in Santa Monica. So he's quite the guy. And yes, I'm really the teacher's teacher. I train the trainers. I work with pretty much just master instructors today. And I do seminars and symposiums all over the world, including Canada, which I'll be in a couple months teaching up there. So, but thank you for that, Henry.
Well, John, thanks. And now we're going to open it up for a question. You can raise your hand physically. You can raise your hand with the little icon. You can put something in chat. You can just start speaking. Does anybody, Janan Sarwar, if you can introduce yourself, and then I'll take your question.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Janan Sarwar. I'm the new deputy editor for Health Authority Imprints, which is a new partnership between Indie Books International and Global Bookshelves International, my company. I'm also a deputy belt in Taekwondo, so one away from black belt. My question first is actually for Mr. Goldberg. And as someone who's interested in podcasts, potentially coaching people to start their own podcast as well, you named the four main reasons that you did. They were all amazing. What is one piece of advice slash regret that you have, you wish you knew before starting your podcast?
Hi, Janan. Great question. And, somehow I think when we all start to do this enough, we become the experts, right? Like, I don't, this woman, the first thing she gave was you interview people for a living. Sure, that helped, but it didn't teach me how to start it. That gave me the confidence to say I know how to interview people. And by the way, you don't even have to interview people on a podcast. It could be your own thoughts. But I think that the advice I would give, and there are a million, I wrote up a document on this because people were asking all the time. There are a million how to start a podcast. And it's like, if you're not a logistics person like me, I think I'm more the creative. I want to run and gun and go. Now suddenly you have to, I mean, Devin knows this as we were getting the book ready. How do I do this? What do I'm like, I suddenly feel like I'm 90 years old and I don't know how to do things. I'm not good with the logistics. And so a lot of it is just creating your cover art. What's the right format to submit it in? And that once you get that down, you're done. And there's plenty of tutorials out there. But I just think a lot of people will look at a podcast as, if I do this, it'll give me that. And to me, it was, I want to share good stories, and whatever comes from it, comes from it. Like, it's hard to quantify that it's going to help your brand. It's hard to quantify that it's going to lead to content. But when I open up my computer here right now and my podcast file, I have something like over 500 guests in it. And so when I start to look at that, I say, I haven't even scratched the surface with this book. We could do courses. We could do, and I could create an ebook overnight with just quotes. So I think that being open-minded to what it brings you, and like every one of you have different clients or different paths, and it's a great way to highlight them. It's a great way to tell other people's stories. It's a great way to connect with them. The last thing I would say is that if you do it, it became a revenue generator for me, but it was never meant to be. And as soon as it became a revenue generator with a little bit of sponsorship, I hired people to help me with it so that I wasn't spending 8 hours editing it and on and on and on and on and on, because you can go as deep as you want on it. So that's a little bit of it, but it's something that I would recommend to anyone, and you don't have to be here's one other thing I would say. This is the best piece of advice I got from the beginning. There's no right answer of how often or how often to do it or how long, but whatever you settle on, stay consistent with it. Because if you're doing it once here and then once in 3 months and then once tomorrow, no one's going to find it. So stick to whatever that is and do it regularly.
Thanks, Janan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Joel. Sig has a question.
Yeah, terrific. Sig Muller, nice to meet you all. Quick, brief story. So I'm starting writing a book. 26 weeks ago this week, I died. I had a sudden cardiac arrest. And there's a whole life story and I think some intervention on the part of guardian angels that are the reason I'm still alive today. I was dead for 8 minutes. And the odds of surviving that are 8%. And being physically, mentally okay, less than 1%. So I'm here for a purpose now. I started a company, BeTheWorld'sBest.com, to help others realize their full potential and be the best version of themselves. So the working title of my book is Dying to Be the World's Best. And just started that in the last month, the writing exercise. But one comment for Janan or anyone that's interested, I've started doing a lot of podcasts in the last month. And there's a great website. It's called podmatch.com. And they have thousands of people that want to be guests, thousands of people that host. and it's a matching service between the two. So, I've already done 4 podcasts in the last 3 weeks and have another 7 or 8 lined up in the coming months. So if you're interested in podcasts, podmatch.com. My question is, as you're writing your book, how do you balance both from a story standpoint and legal standpoint, telling telling stories and talking about real people and using their real names and real companies, and talking about real companies versus pseudonyms, and sort of how do you think about that, and what's the line there?
I'll jump in and I'll let others, if they want to, add. So, first off, the First Amendment, the freedom of the press, gives you the right to write about anybody. There are other laws that prevent you from libeling people. And so if you're not libeling people and you're following the ethics of journalism, you can write about people. Now, from a practical standpoint, we like you to get permission from the person that you're writing about. I recommend sending an email that says, I'd like to fact check this story that's going to go in the book. And you give them their story. And if they say, great, I'm honored, thanks, you're good. If the hassle meter goes off, you have 2 options. One, to genericize the story, like they say in Hollywood, based on a true story. So we can talk about Bob, true story, names and details changed to maintain confidentiality. If it's any kind of story that Bob is going to, or whatever the real name is going to look bad, we recommend genericizing. Or if you're an industry where you have client confidentiality and it would shoot you in the foot to be talking about your clients without expressly saying, I tell a story about Penny Reed, I tell a story about Bill Wooditch, and I say, I have express permission from them to tell you this story. And it's usually with a caveat, and I put their caveat in that they wanted. Penny Reed's was that I don't make her ex-husband the villain of the story. He's not. They just didn't want to be married anymore. Okay. So those are the practical matters of it. And people ask me, how was I able to write a book about Warren Buffett? And the answer is the First Amendment. You can write about anybody, but on a practical nature, I didn't want to pick a fight with the second richest man in America. So I informed him about the book. I informed what we were covering, offered him interview possibilities. He had prostate cancer at the time, and I was able to interview many of the presidents of the companies that Berkshire Hathaway owns. So you balance your legal rights with practical rights in the workplace and in the marketplace. So that's what I had. Did anybody have anything they wanted to add to that?
I would love to. Hi, everyone. I am Ann Bowers Evangelista. I am the author of The Endurance Leader, which we can see right here. I could give my spiel, but it's not my time to do that. But for those of you who know Henry, get used to your next 4 answers around what your company is, what you wrote your book about, and who your audience is, because you will need to do that. I just wanted to add a comment to this, but also ask a question to our authors. So I've seen a lot. I'm a leadership psychologist, executive coach, and organizational consultant. And there's been a lot of talk about this issue, really, particularly when people do short kind of videos about a situation that just happened with a coaching client. And the last thing you really want is for your coaching client to be like, oh my God, did my coach just post a LinkedIn about me, right? Even if you don't use their name, if people can infer that it is them, you run into at least credibility issues. So in my book, where I use a lot of examples, most of my examples are really amalgamations of different coaching clients. And that is certainly a way to ensure that you're not talking about anyone specifically. I do have one client who gave me permission to talk about his story, but especially if you're relating on the what not to do, it's really important to be very careful about that. And then my question for our authors, my book also leverages athletics. My book is using the principles of endurance athletics and leadership to help people build more motivational and sustainable long-term leadership. Just looking at some recent 2025 data about leadership burnout, it's astonishing. But what I wanted to ask of Joel and John is, we've all seen the compelling elements of athletics, but want to reach a broader audience. Joel, you shared specifically a way of doing that with your mother. But I'm curious, how have you bridged the gap between athletics and kind of everyday people, everyday leaders?
I could jump in on this first. And Ann, I love this question only because, not only because, but for the primary reason that from a book standpoint, it follows what my personal goal and theory has been with speaking. That unless someone hires me to come to, say, a sports banquet or a baseball banquet, which they never do, which I'm actually happy about, then it's not ever going to be a room full of sports fans. Like the sports fans and the baseball fans, or sometimes people will say, well, if you're not in Kansas City, will it resonate? I'm like, it has to. And so, like, I could change the names. I mean, I don't, but I could change the names of any of the people I talk about in the book or the speech and have them be interchangeable with any other profession. So to me, the baseball is just a storytelling mechanism. It might get me in the door, but my goal when I speak to an audience, so it's the same thing with this book, is I want the people that say, oh my gosh, I didn't want to go to this, and they'll tell you that, or this book didn't seem like it was interesting to me, but somebody gave it to me or whatever, and I learned a lot from it. And so I think it's just all in the storytelling. I said to, like, one of my signature stories, which was in the first book, is about Albert Pujols, and Henry's a huge baseball fan. And I'll say to an audience, how many people know the name Albert Pujols? And the crux of that story is it took me 7 years to earn his trust. And some people will raise their hand or some won't. And then I'll say, how many people know the name Babe Ruth? And everybody raises their hand. And I'll say, well, just for context, that's the level Albert Pujols was on, because he and Babe Ruth are two of only 4 people to hit 700 home runs in history. So as long as you are speaking to the audience, and for me, always assuming that it is never a baseball or sports thing, and that it is a unique teaching tool, then I think you end up being okay every single time. That's my goal every single time I do it. I want the non-sports fan.
John, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do. And that was great. Yeah. So ditto on, on what Joel just said. What I do is I kind of, because I don't really teach a sport. I'm not involved with that. I'm involved more with a way of life. It's an art form. Actually, we teach an art. And so the path that we're on, which is the master's path, I use that as an analogy for life. We're all on a life's journey, and we all want to be happy, joyful, and fulfilled. So as we're doing this, if we put it in these different phases, phase 1 is to learn and grow. I call that the memory stage. We're trying to learn as much as we can and try to get on top of what it is that we're trying to learn and grow into. And then phase 2 is to share and serve. And share and serve is the apprenticeship phase. That's where we practically apply this information that we've learned. So in my case, the apprenticeship level was in Chula Vista, California, when I lived in the studio and I trained under a master instructor. So then we get to phase 3, which is to lead and inspire. And this is, the Japanese term is Mushin, which is mind, no mind. It's performance level. It's when we've done the rinse and repeat so many times, we've done it so often, we become excellent at what we do. We become the authority. So I liken this whole thing in my book and in my practice as to an art form. There are certainly a lot of similarities with sports, clearly, endurance being a big one, right? We all know that persistence is critical, but when it comes down to it, it comes down to these things, and everybody shares these. Your identity, first, your beliefs, second, your choices, third, your behavior, Then after your behavior, you've got your habits, your potential, your action, your results, and finally, we're back to identity and beliefs once again. It's a circle. It's called the success cycle. And so what I do is I work that into my presentations, showing everybody where they are on this cycle and how we can help them to the next level. So I hope that helped.
I see my friend and our promotion partner, Dan Janelle, on the line, who's written a pickleball book. So maybe, you know, there's the Masters Pickleball Path, Dan. That could be another title in your series.
Love
Yeah,
people.
he's written many serious business books and in computer science and all that. But sometimes we write something for fun too. Any other questions from the field?
Yeah.
Well, Dan, the chair recognizes Dan Janelle.
Thank you. And I bought Joel's book. I can't wait to read it. And John, you inspired me to drop by your book after the call's over too. I do have a question, but I also want to have a networking opportunity for you, Joel. Our local sports director, Joe Schmidt here at ABC TV, has done what you are attempting to do. So you can follow the path of a master who has tons of baseball sports stories and turn that into leadership speeches for general audiences who don't know who Albert Pujols is. I'm putting his LinkedIn link there in the chat for you. He's a great guy. You can use my name or just, you're famous enough, you can just reach out to him. But he's a real giving guy. I'm sure he'll give you lots of great tips and ideas. And he's connected through Mark as well, through NSA. My question for you is like, I'm sure your two books have lots of personal stories showing people at their absolute worst and how they overcame problems. I'm wondering how you develop the rapport with people to get them to open up and tell their most frightful stories.
Dan, it's a great question. And I have met Joe. I don't know him well, but Mark introduced me actually. And so we are kind of on some similar paths. I only like mine better because I have the freedom of 6 months a year not reporting to a TV station, and he still has to do that. I actually last saw Joe in Cooperstown when he was, we were both covering Hall of Fame induction for baseball a couple of years ago. For me, my signature keynote is called Winning Trust. That's the answer. When you build trust with people, they will trust you with their stories. And even to go back to what was being discussed before, like, you know, when can you use it, when can you not, freedom of the press and all those things. For me, I feel like if I've earned the trust, there aren't going to be any issues there. And by the time I wrote these stories, for the most part, people had already told it to me. So why did they tell it to me? I think and hope it's because they trusted me. And if not, then I've got work to do. But I'm also not like, I'm not a gotcha journalist. I'm not someone that is stirring it up. I'm a storytelling relationship guy. That makes it a lot easier. So for me, most of what I had and the phone calls I made or the emails that I sent for this book were follow-ups because they'd already told me the story. I didn't even really feel like, I don't even know if Henry and I talked about this, that I needed their permission because they'd already done the interview publicly. So like the UFC woman, I just sent her, I know how busy she is. She travels all over the world. I see it all on Instagram. I sent her a note the other day saying, hey, just so you know, I included you in my book. I'd love to send you a copy. It was an honor to talk. And so she was thrilled to see that, but I didn't need to ask her permission. She already publicly did the interview with me that went out to Apple and Spotify and the whole world. But to me, and I think Henry covered this a little bit too, like if there's doubt, then dot the I's and cross the T's. You did that with Warren Buffett. For me, if there were some things that someone was uncomfortable with, then I checked with them on it. But for the most part, they'd already told me that story, and it was a matter of following up and asking. But Dan, everything goes back to trust. If I can earn your trust, then you're going to tell me your story. And by the way, I'm not going to get bits and pieces. I'm going to get all of it. The only one that I had trouble with in this book was the last. I'm going to tell you guys a super quick, funny story. Everything involves a story, and I think it's important. But when I finished the manuscript, I sent it to Henry, and he said, you have one more chapter in you. You got 13, and 13's an unlucky number. And so I I dug in and I told another one. The irony of all that is when I looked at my first self-published book, somehow completely ironically, it had 13 chapters. So I'm hoping this book's going to do better because we didn't land on 13. But the 14th chapter ended up being the backup catcher for the Kansas City Royals, named Freddie Fermin. And the very short of the story is that he, at 19 years old, nobody wanted him. And if you're 19 and you're from Venezuela or Latin America and they haven't discovered you yet, you got no chance. You're too old. And he was basically on the streets in the Dominican after not having interest in other academies. And Kansas City took a chance on him only because he needed a place to stay. And they said, here, we'll put you up and you can work out with everybody. And they suddenly realized he was the real deal. And it's an incredibly beautiful story. But the challenge with him, and I've got a great relationship with him, he does trust me, is that there was some lost in translation language issues there. And so it really took a while, and that delayed us when I went for that 14th chapter because I had to get him on a Zoom call when the season ended. I didn't want to interrupt him during the playoffs. We had to do it with a translator, and there was just a lot. I was having a hard time honing in on exactly what happened, in part because of just a misunderstanding and lack of communication. And so that was one where I really had to keep going back and saying, is this really what happened? Is this really what happened? So I think like the short of the answer of the long story here is that when in doubt, circle back and check.
Oh, Joel, you just spoke volumes in that answer. And I know, I think I'm going to speak for some of the authors here on our team, Craig and Riva and Lisa, and well, Dan is a journalist. So we're also actively involved in journalism. And I had one where the guy told me this story and it involved something with his wife. And I said, are you sure you want me to include this story? Oh, no, yeah, do it. And then I wrote it and I said, I want to fact check it. Do you sure you want this story in there? Oh, yeah, go for it. 2 days later, I turned it into my editor. 2 days later, I've talked to my wife. Take that story out of it. So I'm
just
glad
to add
that day and not the next day because he'd been sleeping on the couch for a long time.
I have the exact same story, and it didn't end up in a book, thankfully, or it would have lived forever. But one year at spring training, I'm doing a sit-down interview with a ball player named Jeff Rancour. Henry will remember him. Other baseball fans will. He's on TV now, but one of the bigger personalities in the game, and just doing a very casual interview in front of a camera. And he mentioned something, I don't remember the whole context of it, about his pregnant wife eating Five Guys every single day during the off season. And anybody that knows that, like, you probably don't want to be talking about your pregnant wife eating burgers every day. But he said it on camera. And so I put it on Twitter. And the next morning, there was like a rebellion from the players. I had one player calling me out in front of everyone in the locker room saying I got him in trouble. And just by that tweet, and he's in the doghouse, and people were giving me the cold shoulder. And I got an argument with this other player. And I got called into the principal's office on this one. And I generally don't. And then one of the stars of the team said, man, they called him Frenchie, Jeff Rancour, you really got Frenchie in trouble there. And I go, all I did was tweet what he said on camera. And the player says, wait, he said that on camera? I said, yeah. We have the whole copy of it. And he goes, oh, he's just trying to save face. And so suddenly I realized, but there was still, like, from that day forward, that internal thing in my head said, yeah, this could be fun, but before I do this, let's double check first. And it just saves you a lot of trouble. And I talked about trust. Sometimes that instinct can lead to an erosion of trust just because it was a fun moment. And so I think trust that internal voice in your head.
Trust. I got taken to the woodshed when I was writing for the Associated Press on a Lost in Translation. So Dave Concepcion with the Reds hit a home run to win the game. But the inning before, he let a ball go between his legs that let in a go-ahead run that would have lost the game. So all the reporters asked him about the home run. They all leave, and I stayed behind. And I said, what about the eighth inning when the ball went between your legs? Because he was like Gold Glove winning shortstop. And he said, when that ball went through my legs, my heart, she broke. And I go, oh, this is my lead. And the editor in New York said, you just made Dave Concepcion sound stupid. Is he an intelligent man? Yeah. He says, you know who doesn't speak Spanish? You. If you interviewed him in Spanish, it would have been great. And I said, oh, I get that. So sometimes it's great to have that editor checking you and a lot of us, we're flying out here without editors. We're putting stuff out there. Dan, do you have a comment or a question?
Once again.
Yeah. Joe, you talking about Dan or Daniel? Which one of us?
Oh, Daniel Feynman.
Okay. Daniel Feynman, the book on succession planning systems. Yes, Henry, I made a potential mistake probably 2 years ago. I was on a podcast and the person interviewing me, who happens to be a lawyer, as his podcast started to talk about a mutual acquaintance who had introduced us. And he kept going into more and more specifics. And I acknowledged certain things. A week later, I'm coaching with one of my other clients who said, you know, everybody knows who you're talking about. And I went, what? He probably is the only one on the planet who knew enough intimate details about the person who we were talking about on the podcast to put two and two and two together. But ever since then, I've been overly careful, not only in my writing, but on podcasts, of making sure that we're leave out enough details, unless someone has given us permission, so that we can't have anyone infer, well, I know who that is. In fact, I did that in the book, if you remember, in the stories about different consulting clients. I tried to anonymize and in many cases homogenize the examples so that nobody could say, well, I know who that is. And Joel brought up a point on trust, and we'll bring this together. Trust is critical, particularly, I left commercial banking 29 years ago to start my consultancy. I sometimes and currently work with competing firms. I have to be very careful, not only in what I write, but what I say with each of them. And I'm completely transparent. Both firms know that I'm working with each of them, but I am extremely careful, to the point of reviewing my notes before we have a session. Then we work together, making sure I write my notes and keeping the notes separate so that I don't violate any confidentialities. When, Anne talks about leadership, which is what the whole book is about. When you are a leader, you have to demonstrate clear leadership, including integrity, developing trust, and making smart decisions. That's all I wanted to add.
It was great, Daniel. It triggered something that I want to share. We had one of our authors write a chapter in her book about a high school teacher that verbally abused her. I think it was verbal abuse. So, verbal abuse, but verbally abused her. And she changed details. But I went to her and her mother, who was also one of our authors, and said, I would omit chapter 9 because this person can figure out, and others can, that you're talking about them. There's enough clues here that people will know who you're talking about. And, we could be looking at libel here. And I said, I'm not an attorney, I'm a publisher. So I'm coming from that warning standpoint. And the mom said, well, my sister is an attorney, and we'll hear what she has to say about that. And she called me up 2 days later and said, my sister, the attorney, says, take out chapter 9. I said, okay, well, we're in agreement then. So yeah, we have to, just because we have the legal right to do something, it's not wise. And to Joel's point, if it destroys trust, what did we gain? And it's funny, all the journalists on this call, I would say that I know, none of them are gotcha journalists. We all went away from that. We did not want to have our careers with that. There's enough positive to write about, unless we're reviewing Broadway shows and video games, but Then you're supposed to give your opinion. But for the rest of us, it's better not to do the gotcha journalism. Any other question? I see we've got just a few minutes left. Anyone from the field? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you at the Agency Rainmaker Forum at UC San Diego, February 28th and 1st. I know a lot of you are speaking, and we'll see you there, and also will be in some of the author things. Some of you won't be able to be with us, but you'll be with us in the fall at the Health Authority Forum that we're going to have at UC San Diego in September. So I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for everybody's participation today. And we look forward to seeing you on these monthly calls. This is to build community. I omitted something, Devin, in the future, if you could remind me. I'd love everybody just to put your name and contact information if you would like that. These are non-selling zones, but these are definitely networking zones and building relationship zones. So if you want to do that. Thanks to everybody for supporting Joel and John and their books and their path. And looking forward to seeing you again on one of our calls. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you all so much.